Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Lee Halliday, and in this video we're going to learn all about web scraping. And scraping is basically when you want some data that's on a web page, but there's no sort of obvious API for grabbing it. So you look to sort of write your own code to read that data from a website. You're scraping it off of that website. So on this page we're looking at a Tesla stock, and if we scroll down a little bit, there's this company description down here. And this is the data I want to be able to scrape. And we're going to cover two different ways to scrape this data. And then we're going to hop over here to a different website, which is a React app. And it's a lot harder to scrape, so we'll sort of look for alternative ways to grab this information. Same thing, we're going to grab the company profile here for Shopify. So first things first, if we open the dev inspection tools and we sort of look where this element is, so it's in this div with a class of table element, but the problem is that that's not a unique selector. So I can't just select using class of table element because it's going to probably get the wrong one. One way you can do it is you can right click and you can say copy selector. So if we were to sort of come over into our code and just paste this to see what it looks like, it says look inside of content for a div with the nth child of 28. So basically the 28th div inside of this content ID is the one we're looking for. The problem is as soon as they add another element, your whole thing's done. So you want to find a selector that's sort of like the minimal amount possible that will find what you're looking for. Something that's not too specific. So what we can do here is we can say table element is inside of content, but it's the last div here and it probably won't change. So what we can do is say, I'm blocking a lot of ads on this site apparently, document.querySelector, we can say look inside of content, it's direct children, let's find the class of table element and let's get the last child. So what will that do is it will bring back this div and then we can just ask for the inner text and that will get the text that we are actually looking for. So this is obviously just in the browser. It's time to hop over into Node and we'll look at two ways to do this. One using Puppeteer, which is a headless browser, basically pops open Chrome and you can control it with Node. And then we'll look at using Cheerio, which is sort of like jQuery but for Node. So we're going to start with Cheerio because it's probably the easiest and it's definitely the most efficient. And you can use this anytime it's like a server rendered page. So basically if you were to view source, everything you need is in the source already. That's what Cheerio wants. So what we're going to do is just copy the URL. We're going to come into this code and let's just talk about what's being imported and what we're doing here. So we're importing fetch because we're going to fetch the content of the page and then we're going to use Cheerio to parse out the data that we want. We're going to do this for two stocks, Apple and Tesla, and we're going to do it inside of this app function that's called here. So what we're going to do is just iterate over the symbols. So we can say for await symbol of symbols, just like that. And we're going to call a function that when passed a symbol returns us the company description. So we'll say description equals get description symbol. And this is going to have a promise. We're going to await its response. And then what we'll do is just console.log the symbol and the description so we can see what's showing up. So we got to implement this get description function. Async function get description takes in a symbol, and then what it's going to do is basically make a request to this website that we had open here. So we can do that using fetch, and we'll just say const response is await fetch. Paste this in, and let's take this portion here. And the nice thing is you want to basically look for something in this URL that you can pull the data for. And what I found out with this is, yes, it says Tesla dash, then the symbol, but you can actually just remove this and it handles the redirect and everything for us. So that's pretty handy. So we'll just replace this whole thing, embed the symbol in. And then when we get the response back, we're going to get the text of it. So typically with Fetch, I'm asking for the JSON of it, but in this case, I'm asking for the text content. And if we just console.log it for now to see if it's working, we can run this code. So Cheerio.js down here. And it's outputting all of this HTML that website is rendering. So now that we have the text, we can use Cheerio to extract what we actually want. So the first thing we're going to do is basically get an instance of Cheerio, and we're going to use the $sign because that's sort of what jQuery used to do. And we'll say Cheerio.load the text. So you pass in the text that you want Cheerio to be able to parse through and find the content for. And so with this $sign, it works very much like jQuery with, it's a function actually, and you can pass in a selector. So we're just going to do that same selector. I think I have it memorized. It was content, direct child, class of table element, the last child. And when you get that back, that's sort of the element, and then you can ask for its text. So we're going to return this as the response. Run this again. And hopefully down here on the bottom, you can see that it's the symbol Tesla, and then this is the content. So it's got a whole bunch of like tabs and new line characters and whatnot. So we can just call trim on that, and that will clean that content up. And what we should be left with is basically the data for the two symbols that we're iterating over. So Apple and its description, Tesla and its description, and we've just scraped their content. So that's the first approach. You can use Cheerio along with some like Fetch or Axios or something like that to get the content of the page. And this works for server rendered content. Next approach is Puppeteer. And this basically pops open a Chrome browser. And this will work for either server rendered or like a single page application like React or whatever you're using, Vue. So in here, we're going to do the same thing where we iterate over the symbols. For await symbol of symbols. And in here, we're going to get a description back that will await from getDescription function. Pass in the symbol, and then we'll console.log the response out, symbol and description. So we basically have to go and implement this getDescription function. So async function getDescription receives a symbol. Okay, so in here, we first need to basically instantiate Puppeteer. So we'll do that first by asking for a browser. So we do that by saying await Puppeteer, and the thing we pass it is launch, and we're going to tell it to be headless false at the beginning. So headless false basically means it's going to show you visually what's actually happening. It's going to pop open a browser that you can see the page loading. We'll see how that works in a second. So once we have the browser, we're going to ask for a page. So we'll say browser.new page. And then we can tell the page to go to a specific URL. So we're going to use that same URL from here. Just like this. And then what we're going to do for now is we're just going to close the browser once it's done. So there's going to be a little bit of work we have to do in here to actually go and extract this data. But this is good enough for now. Let's see what it looks like. So if we run this file node Puppeteer, what it's going to do is pop open a Chrome, and it says Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. So you can see it's loading the Apple page. It's waiting for sort of all the scripts to finish loading and whatnot. Then it closes. Now it pops up, Tesla. It's going to wait for all the scripts to load, and then it's going to close that. So you can see it's quite a bit slower than Cheerio. So it shouldn't be your go-to approach for scraping. It's sort of like if you have to, because it's a single page application or something like that. It requires JavaScript to get the content you want. Anyways, so with that thing popping up, we now want to go and extract the data that we need from it. So we can do that by saying const text is equal to await page.evaluate. And evaluate receives a function, And you can think about whatever is sort of run inside of this function to be as if you were running it from the browser console. It's sort of like anything you could type in here, like document.querySelector. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to say return, because we want this value back, document.querySelector, and we'll pass in that same query selector, so .table element last child. And because this is just like DOM manipulation now, we're going to ask for the inner text, like that. So we'll get this back, we'll close the browser, and then finally we'll return the company description. So if we run this again, it's going to pop open the browser, wait for it to run. It is slow, no? So there we can see we got Apple. Now it's doing Tesla. And we'll just wait for this to finish, and then we'll pop that headless false to headless true, so you can see the difference. So we'll clear this, rerun our code, and this time it's doing the same thing, except it's sort of like creating, it's opening Chrome in the background. It's not showing you visually. So headless, it doesn't have a head, you can't see it. And it's quite a bit faster, I believe. You can see here that we have a response already for Apple and for Tesla. So that's how you can scrape data using Puppeteer inside of this evaluate function, where you can use all your normal DOM tools that you're used to, document.querySelector, querySelector all, etc. And you can actually click around too, like you could find an element, you could click on it, and then you could scrape the data that it produces. So it's pretty flexible, but it's not as fast as Cheerio. So we're going to look now at the second website, this one here. So this is showing Shopify's company description. So the first thing we'd want to do is right-click and inspect this. And this looks like it's using some sort of like CSS and JS tool, because all of the classes on this are like crazy. They're not like human readable, right? It's EL, WAL. This is probably unique, so you could just sort of extract this, I would imagine, document.querySelector.inner text. So yeah, you could definitely grab the content this way. You'd have to do it in Puppeteer, not Cheerio, because if you were to look at the page source, there's nothing here. It sort of starts out, it's a React app, I believe. Something told me that. React, I don't know. I was looking in their source when I was looking into this, and I found React in there. Another way you could look is basically the components. So there we go. It's using styled components. And anyways, so all that to say, you can't use Cheerio because it's not server rendered. You could use Puppeteer if you wanted, but there is a better way. So if you were to look at this page source, notice there's no content at all. So where the heck is it getting its content from? Think about a React app. The React app loads, and it's going to make some sort of API call to fetch the data. So rather than just scraping it right off the website, why don't we just try to use the same API that the app is using itself? So if we were to go over to the network tab and reload it, we can sort of look through all of the requests it's making, and you can try to find the one where it's loading the data to populate the content on the page. So I've looked through this before, and I know that it's using GraphQL to grab this data. Just refresh it again. I'm not going to preserve, so I get just the two. Oh, there's more than I thought. So it's making a bunch of GraphQL requests. So if we just go into them and we see sort of what data we're getting back. So this is down here in the payload. It's a request to the GraphQL endpoint, and it's passing in a GraphQL query called getQuoteBySymbol. It's expecting these variables shop and locale of en. Here's the query it's asking for, all the different fields that it wants GraphQL to respond with. And over here in the preview is what we're getting back. So somewhere down here, there's this long description. Shopify offers an e-commerce platform. So that's basically the content that we wanted. This company description up here at the top. So why don't we just use this GraphQL instead of trying to actually scrape it from this website? So there's a little bit of a trick where if you right-click a request in the network tab and you say copy, we can just say copy as fetch or copy as node fetch. So why don't we copy that, go over to our code and see what that actually looks like. So I'm gonna go over to my SPA, single page application. It's the same sort of setup. We're using fetch. We're going to iterate over a couple symbols. So why don't we just set that up first? That was for await symbol of symbols. And we're going to say description is equal to await get description for the symbol. And then we'll console.log the response out. Symbol and description. So we have to go implement get description. Async function get description takes a symbol. All right, so I'm just going to paste in what I copied from the browser. So I paste this in. Let me just close this so it's easy to read. And what it does is it grabs the URL that the request was made to and all of the different headers that were sent. So this is great because if the website is looking for specific headers, by just copying this, you're going to get all of the correct headers that it's expecting because it's the exact same request that the browser made. It's got the referrer policy, and then down here is the body. So that was basically this down here, the request payload, which is the GraphQL query itself. So what we can do now is basically just, yes, it looks ugly. It's got tons of new lines. None of that really matters. The only thing that really matters is we have to pop out this variable for the symbol of shop with whatever the variable is we're dealing with. So we're going to change this to backticks so we can embed. And then we can come in here and just embed our symbol. So save that. I don't think the referrer matters, so we could embed it if we want, but it doesn't matter. Symbol. But then we would have to make this backticks. Cool. So because this is just fetch, what we can do is we can say response is await fetch. And because we're getting JSON back, because it's a GraphQL API, we can say data is equal to await response.json. And then why don't we take a look at the data we're getting back. So pop open the terminal again, run this node file. And here we can see the output of the response from the GraphQL API. So for the symbol shop, down here below, this is the data we're getting back. So it would be data.getQuoteBySymbol, which is the query name. And then we wanted the long description. So we can just return that. Return data.data.get, what was it again? Get quote by symbol dot long description, like this. So if we were to run the app again, just clear that out. What we get back is super quick, no? Like look how fast that is, boom, boom. Because you're just making 2 GraphQL response or requests. So it's just taking milliseconds each request. What did this one take? 57 milliseconds. So this is by far the fastest approach if you can find it. Just use the same API that their developers are using. So here we get shop and then the description and then Canadian National Railway and the description here below. So what we covered today were 3 different ways to scrape data from the website. First, server rendered application with Cheerio. It's sort of like jQuery, but for Node, where you're given a whole bunch of HTML. You can use query selectors to find the content that you want. We used Puppeteer, which can be used for server rendered applications, but it can also be used for React applications when you need to click around. And this is sort of like you're actually executing this code in a real browser, because it is a real browser. But you can say headless is true so that it doesn't physically sort of visually pop up on the screen. And the last way is basically if it's a React app that's using GraphQL API calls, why don't you just use the same API calls that they're using? It's the best way, it's the fastest way. So this is the preferred approach, but obviously it depends on the website that you're scraping data from. One caveat, you don't own the data that you're scraping. It belongs to the website that you're scraping it from. So you should probably look into whether it's actually legal to get this data, because you wouldn't want to build a website around data that you've grabbed illegally on the internet. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Take care. Bye.